Almost forgotten about our intro music. Get rid of that. Yes, friends. On a Tuesday, it's OGP, the One Giant podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts over here, Adam Armbrecht, breaking down not only the Giants, but also the Brooklyn Nets all off season over on the Locked On Nets podcast with my boy, Doug Norrie, and joined by the ever healthy, wealthy, and wise seasoned generational ticket holder, Mr. Andrew Makowitz. How are we, sir, following a holiday weekend?
Wonderful holiday weekend. Spent some time up in the mountains, spent a little time poolside. But Adam, I heard you had a really good grilling situation going on yesterday for
It's
celebrating
inappropriate to
Memorial
bring
Day.
that up, to the public here. I consider myself affectionately referred to within the family as King Goulash. You don't know what you're gonna get, but a lot of times it can be delicious. I went for it. Beautifully delicious wrapped sausages in a bacon casing, hot honey glaze. And what you're gonna want to do is just keep your eye on it because that grill can get away from you in a hurry. You might almost burn down your brother's house. But at the end of the day, people, I think that the juices were sealed in tight, and everybody had a good time overall.
Listen, that's all you can ask for Memorial Day. A little fun in the sun, a little barbecue, maybe a little poolside action.
That's it.
So good
And
for
by the
you.
way, and hot and only getting hotter here. I know it may cool off at the end of the week potentially, but a handful of nice hot days is pretty much what you want here, unless maybe you're working the OTAs and you're you're a New York Football Giant rookie or otherwise, and you're trying to navigate the sweltering, what I assume, sun out there. And we know that we're going to talk about just where the OTAs go from here, and there's a bit of a delay coming up after the next handful of days that we'll get some more looks here at the Giants, but coming out of these first couple of weeks, there have already been, I think, some affirmations that we want to get to on the young rookie draft class. There's also some, I'll call it a little bit of offensive line good news, bad news. Andy, which would you like first, the good news or the bad news?
Give me the bad news first.
Sure. The bad news is that a player that you were very fond of, and I think rightfully so. You convinced me. You put out a nice path for him to be a contributor to this team. One, Nick Gates, who recently, with an interview with Dan Dugan, kind of said, not kind of, he said, not even really sure if I'm going to be able to play again in my career. That's the goal. I'm working back towards it. But they highlighted 7 surgeries in order just to get himself back to a place where he could consider the idea of it. We had some people say over on YouTube in the conversation going back to last week about, I think he starts on the pup list. That's certainly viable. But when you hear that, is this good faith from the Giants giving him every opportunity and also understanding we talk about, the financial ramifications and roster spots, etc. Even the pup list feels like something that might be in doubt, not because it holds a roster spot, but just because you may find out by the end of the summer that Nick Gates effectively is done playing NFL football.
Well, that's the tough part, right, Adam? Is you have the player, you have the person, you also have the contract. There's like a lot of levels to this. Obviously the Giants haven't had to really make any decision on Nick Gates. So the idea behind that is, okay, we don't have to make a decision, so let's not until we actually have to. And so while he's there rehabbing, you hope that he can get back to full strength. I mean, you can see some of the photos from camp, and you see his leg, and you can just imagine like that how gruesome things had to be for him to be able to even get to where he is now. And so, to be honest with you, it's tough. I was excited about the idea of his versatility if he could get back healthy, but even the way that he was talking, it makes it seem like he's saying, "Hey, I'm just happy to have my leg right now, and we're gonna figure all the rest of it out later." Right?
We'll see. Yeah, having two legs feels good. I mean, remember Alex Smith obviously suffered that gruesome injury as well, where it was like life threatening. Could have had to amputate his leg. I don't think that Nick Gates quite got to that same point, although it was as gruesome of an injury, certainly. And the idea of would he ever be able to have the mobility, just getting up and moving around, right? Let alone being able to be a part of an NFL team. So we'll see how it works out there. The good news then though is a young rookie in Joshua Ezeudu this past week, when they started to line up and give some, rotate in some of the other players on the offensive line, he popped up at left tackle while Andrew Thomas was wearing the red jersey. I think it's almost, you may just misspoke. versatility, a guy that can do a lot of things for this offensive line. I think Joshua Ezeudu, and this again, I think was I know Jordan Renan was speaking to it, but also Dan Dugan, who said, "Hey, he showed up here at left tackle," and I thought, well, this just speaks to the order of progression that you'd like to see for him. However quickly this track is, you start out by showing that you're capable, athletic, versatile. Okay, great. Now you go ahead and show in camp in the OTAs, yeah, I could play if you needed a blow. If somebody took a little bit of a, a little bit got dinged up on a couple of plays, I can play possibly anywhere across this offensive line, which makes him an elite backup offensive lineman. And then if he overtakes someone for a starting spot, you obviously are happy to have that. And however it shuffles, you still feel like you have good depth. Do you find it intriguing to see that this early on, they're giving him some reps there, indicative of, hey, we want this kid to be ready to step in if called upon at more than just the interior?
So it's interesting because when you start talking about it, I'm going to sound a little bit like a hypocrite because I love the versatility that Nick Gates
Oh,
has, and the promise of Nick Gates being there as a backup was good. I'm kind of
yeah.
like the first question I have for you about the Joshua Zudu stuff and him playing left tackle
Mhm.
is: are they putting him there just because Andrew Thomas is hurt and they don't want to move Evan Neal around? And Matt Pert already has a red penny on; he's not healthy yet. Like, is he just there out of necessity, or are they doing this with the idea of he might be able to play that position?
Um, well, I mean, I think obviously you're not gonna take Neil and swing him over to the left side for some reps because Thomas is hurt, right? Like that's not going to be the process that you would go through here. You're not maybe going to take whatever Feliciano and say, well, now you'll go out there, right? There's certain guys that are set at the spots, at least coming into camp here, specifically with Neil on the right side. So you don't want to disrupt the apple cart from that standpoint, but there are also like, you could go to three or four other veteran or backup players and throw them in there for the reps. So I think you have to look at it from Zudu's a rookie. So you're not trying to mess up his development, right? Early in his young career. So any choices that you make for him, it'd be the same as saying it's entirely different profile, entirely different expectations. But the same way that you wouldn't just move Evan Neal from right tackle over to left tackle, you're not just gonna throw a Zudu out there for the heck of it. They may be throwing him out there to say, we believed he's athletic and versatile. Let's give him a little taste here. Let's just see what this looks like. And maybe we'll confirm, okay, we want to keep him on the interior guard, center guard positions, or in the long term, we do have a viable option to have a backup that maybe is more effective than some of the other options.
Right, but that kind of, in my mind, I'm saying Joshua Ezeudu to me was always going to be competing for the starting left guard position, right? Like that's immediately where I thought he was going to come in. So does this say more about the fact that Shane Lemieux might be a more viable starting left guard than Ezeudu week one? Because if it was neck and neck, you think taking any reps away from Ezeudu playing guard wouldn't be beneficial to him if you want him to start week one in that position, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, 100%. The other thing would be maybe they're looking to say, can we overtake, right? Can we challenge someone that's already on the existing depth chart? Can this be a player that moves there? To your point on Shane Lemieux, I strongly believe that healthy, he is the guy that should have the starting role coming into camp. He's played in the NFL. He's had his whole rookie season. Obviously, second year got cut short there after just 17 reps. And we've heard this from a lot of the fans. And I get it. Like there is value there, and I like it, and I'll be happy and excited if he is the starting left guard because it means the previous regime actually did something right. Rare that you get to say that. They did something right. They gave you a starting offensive lineman. And also, I think we're as high as I am on Joshua Ezeudu, we're pretty early in the process for him to be challenging for that job, right? Like, so again, kicking him and giving him some reps at the left tackle. Well, you're not kicking out Shane Lemieux to the left tackle spot and letting Ezeudu play at left guard, right? So I think we got to get into, camp later in the summer. We got to get into preseason games and see live reps against competition before you can formulate like any real projections around saying, well, if Lemieux looks marginally ahead of Ezeudu, okay, maybe somewhere along the way during this season, a switch gets made. Or Shane Lemieux has established himself, right? He looks solid, regardless of how good Ezeudu may look. Shane Lemieux has earned and is holding on to the starting job, and that's fine too to go into this year, understanding, he's in his third year. Obviously, you can always start to turn things over another season from now, or shuffle the order of how you line up.
Yeah, it's tough. I keep going back and forth on it because obviously Pert is hurt or has had a red
Exactly, I
injury
know. There's so many
injury
question marks
designation.
around it.
So you don't even know if everyone was healthy who would get the reps. It's, Corey Cunningham had gotten some of the different reps as well. I don't know if Gano is getting out there and being able to get some reps too.
Can I
You
ask
know,
you can I ask you something on Matt Pert?
hit
Do you
me.
think, like, is he deserving of the same treatment that Shane Lemieux is getting? Like, if Matt Pert was healthy walking in the door this offseason, we know it was a bad sample size and he lost his starting job to Nate Solder. But in the same way that we talk about the rookie season for Lemieux was a mixed bag, did some things very well. I'm not even going to mention the metrics by which some people judge him. We're not holding ourselves to that. But there were areas that he struggled and needs to continue to develop. I know that Matt Pert was not as consistent, and even in his rookie season, right? They were using him situationally, bringing him in for certain reps and certain spots where they thought he was a better option than that year, ironically, Nate Solder, not the following year where Nate Solder was the better option. But he was a third round pick too. Is that just, are we labeling that as a miss now? Or is it, again, if he was healthy walking into camp, do you think that he would be getting opportunities to be successful or to, showcase what he could do, possibly maybe on the interior, right? Understanding that obviously Neal is there now at the right tackle position
Well, so I think that the
or a
difference
backup
is
swing tackle for that matter. Sorry.
right. But I think the difference is at the tackle position. It feels like, and maybe I'm wrong, but either you got it or you don't, because you're on the outside and you're going to be going against
Humanity a
some of
little bit
these
easier on the
big.
interior.
Right, like, you're going against these massive edge rushers, like, think about Kayvon Thibodeau going against, Nate Solder in practice. It would look like a matador defense type of situation, whereas when you're on the interior, you almost can, like, get away with it, and maybe you can kinda mask that. If you cannot play offensive tackle in this league, it gets exposed very quickly.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how it starts out. And again, maybe something that we talked about in Nick Gates being able to stick around or start in some form of injury to begin the year. Matt Pert has a little ways to go here. See how it progresses when we're talking about the knee. He had some other little issues that kind of came to light after the last offseason and what it was like. It felt like a lot like Andrew Thomas in his rookie year. We were like, you find out that you go, this guy was dealing with a few different things, right? And maybe that hindered how he looked last year. Maybe he was never fully healthy, etc. We'll find out where it goes. The end of the day, I think you have to feel good about, not the end of the episode, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the offensive line, you have to feel good about what you're seeing from Shane Lemieux. I think you have to be excited about Ezeudu. And again, probably another, few months here. Let's get to some preseason reps later on in August and say, oh, look who came in first on the second team unit, or look who got some snap counts with the starters and with Daniel Jones there. That being the case, though, the other thing that we wanted to touch on here before we get to an interesting take from Chris Sims ranking the QBs coming into the NFL season, always fun to take a look at those, especially when you're in this off-season point, because it gives you a backdrop to compare, again, when you get some live reps in some preseason games, however many the starters ultimately end up getting. But do we already feel like that Joe Shane is being proven correct on what was maybe looked at as a interesting, borderline, maybe questionable draft that he had this year? You and I were excited about it. A lot of Giants fans are excited about it, but there's no denying there are several players where you went, oh, that's a little bit higher. You and I have debated Wan'Dale Robinson. I really like him. He's a guy that seems to have proven Joe Shane right already with some of what he's flashing here in OTAs. And then likewise, a guy that you were high on coming out of the draft, but again, was arguably someone that said you probably could have gotten him, another round later. And that's Daniel Bellinger. Can you prove anything in these OTAs to say, you know what? Shane was right. The turnover in this regime, they are finding quality players, even if we, can marginally disagree on when they were taken.
Think back to last season. It's a non-Giants noteworthy news or note from the offseason.
Sure.
Do you remember during the start of the offseason, there was all this talk about Jamar Chase? It was he has a case of the drops, and it could be that
But
he
that's,
ends
yeah, I
up
knew,
being
yeah,
like the worst wide receiver pick ever in the top 10 because he can't catch the ball. Has he lost it
right.
completely? And then you see him on the field, you're like, oh no, none of that matters. He's absolutely outstanding. So like I will say, like, you got to take things with a grain of salt. Like,
Tempering expectations. Very true.
yes, I think you need to temper some of these expectations because we're getting really high on these guys, yet we've never seen them before. On the Jamar Chase front, it was like, yeah, I know he was absolutely amazing at LSU and he never dropped the ball in his life. And like, but we're going to take 5 days of OTAs and we're going to say that Jamar Chase can't catch the football anymore. I don't want to go that far, even if it's super positive things for the Giants, because I do think that Wan'Dale Robinson can make an impact, but he may only get three, four, 3 or 4 touches a game early on as they get him into everything. Daniel Bellinger might only have 2 catches or 3 catches for 40 yards. And I don't want people to say we're completely underutilizing them, we're devaluing them, or they're not flashing the same way that they did in camp.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. It's funny because there's no comp when you look at Kadarius Toney for the Giants going back to last year. Obviously, didn't get into the rotation right for the first handful of weeks, then had injuries throughout the season. So you don't kind of have this path, even though he's a first rounder and Wandell is taken there in the second. I still think you look at that skill set and say we have expectations for this kid, right? You want to see him coming along, but to your point, if he gets what 7 or 8 targets in a game, potentially, right? By the end of the year, you're talking about significant. I mean, that would be, I'm not talking about week 1 out of the gate, but by weeks 3 or 4, right? How many touches? Where is he lining up? I think there's a lot of mystery around how Kadarius Toney, all these players are going to get utilized in this new system. But I do think, they talked about it last week, beating Aaron Robinson on the deep pass, coming down with it, maintaining control, going to the ground. Like those are probably the things that you do really love to see, whether it's, in blanket coverage, OTAs, preseason, etc. Just him showcasing that he's capable of doing those things. Again, because I instantly looked at and liked the pick coming out of the draft, I just look at this as like you are giving affirmation that you can do this. And you mentioned about some of the different players. I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast or not, heights, right? Successful guys that were under 5'8", et cetera. And it looked like it was like one at every 7 or so was successful at the NFL based on those measurables. The funny thing is, and we could probably bring this up later in the week, is but look at every single wide receiver. Like, what is the success hit rate on wide receivers in general? If it's 1 out of every 6, you go, okay, so not that big of a difference. It really does come down to the player. On the Daniel Bellinger side, though, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a boost here because the first thing we thought about from Daniel Bellinger is the blocking. And it's something that neither of the other 2 tight ends that they have on the roster, potentially ahead of them at least, don't necessarily offer. But what I found interesting was when they talked about Bellinger's college game, they said, hey, listen, he's going to come in. He can be a blocker for you first. We know the Giants may or may not use a lot of inline blocking from the tight end position. But then they said, and the only spot that he really had success was a lot of these little bleed outs off the line and using his athleticism to catch and then turn up field. He has some quickness, some short area quickness that he can get the ball, turn up field, and get some yards. And the first thing I thought was, well, if we're talking about everybody that the Giants have on their receiving core, like that might be the exact thing that Daniel Bellinger can do. Run a little 4-yard hook route, right? Be the safety valve for Daniel Jones. Something we talk about all the time. You always want to have that check down guy at the tight end position. I know that they're used differently around the league. There's a lot of versions, and the NFL is modernized in a lot of ways. And yet you still want to have the safety valve player. And I think Bellinger can be a bit of that. And certainly, if everyone is healthy going into the year, Bellinger can just be the forgotten guy that every time he's catching the ball, you go, yeah, because you're worried about everything else that's happening around you with Toney, Galladay, if healthy, right? You mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson, to say nothing of Breida and obviously Saquon Barkley out of the backfield.
Well, the weird thing is though, Adam, like I'm high on Bellinger. I had other tight ends like Kate Otten that I thought would be good from a blocking perspective.
Yeah.
A big, strong body guy, but Daniel Bellinger has shown his athleticism. It almost makes you wonder, and the question kind of keeps lingering in the back of my mind is like he played at San Diego State. How could they mismanage and misutilize such an athletic talent at San Diego State? It's not like there's 12 guys that are going in the first round at San Diego State. So explain to me how he plays in 11 games and only catches 31 passes. Like, what
Yeah.
scheme are they running that Daniel Bellinger only gets 3 catches a game when he looks like he's got this crazy athleticism? It looks like he never drops the ball. He's making these one-handed grabs in practice. Like, that's shocking to me. And I'm trying to figure out, like, did they underutilize him, or was it the scheme? Like, what was it that prohibited Daniel Bellinger from flashing the way he already has in OTAs?
Yeah, and you know what? From college to the pros, right? What are the expectations for the tight ends? What's the expectation of the offensive line? And knowing nothing of San Diego State and saying how good was their offensive line, right? Because Bellinger is a good blocker. So how many opportunities were you afforded to give a player like that, understanding the other thing that he can do for you? But and that's probably true too. And this is why I think, not to speak to our abilities around scouting or looking at players coming out of college, but this is the thing that you're not. going to be able to, watch, take the measurables or watch the combine and say, oh, well, obviously X, right? The things you need to take away from watching tape is saying, what is this player potentially capable of? Like that's a lot of what you're doing when you draft these prospects, especially in the middle and late rounds. You're saying, oh, it's not about what he showed necessarily, 70 catches at the college level, et cetera. It's about what we think his skill set and measurables tells us we can make him into, right? And that's maybe arguably where if you're the Giants, you look at a Bellinger and you go, yeah, like I know you labeled him as a blocking tight end, but we think he's a serviceable pass catcher, maybe even, maybe has some even bigger upside than we realize, but we see that he can also do both things. And if you look at him that way, all of a sudden he's a prospect that maybe should be elevated, even though we know tight end a diminished position by NFL prospect standards anyway. So it'll be
It
interesting to say. It's interesting.
it is, and so, I mean, this is just, food for thought. We didn't actually talk about this before the show, but
All right.
Daniel Bellinger's career numbers at San Diego State is 68 catches for
Love it.
771 yards and 5 touchdowns, which in this day and age, that would be a season in the NFL that would put him
Sure.
maybe, in the back half of the top 10. It would actually give him the ninth most receiving yards in a season. That was his 4-year career. I think, I think this is interesting. I think we should explore it a little bit more. What do you think? Like, where is year one Daniel Bellinger if he
Mm.
continues to perform the way that he has? Does he get to 600 yards? Like where do you kind of see him fitting in? And I can tell you, roughly who that equates to in today's NFL, and you can tell me whether or not you say, oh yeah, that's kind of where I see him.
Yeah, that's a good one to do, especially with Robinson as well, right? Rookie campaigns, where would that stack up in the NFL? And maybe putting a little bit of perspective for Giants fans of, what bar are we setting for them? Because if you say you want to see this kid go for 700 yards receiving out of the tight end position, be like, all right, well, you want a top 10 tight end. Like that's you're talking about having a top 10 NFL tight end. And I think that's a little bit that's a little that's a that's a lofty goal, I guess I would say. Let's stick on this for a minute. We're gonna get into we'll hold it for next episode, the QB rankings from Chris Sims. So consider it a little bit of a tease here. But let's stay on the Bellinger piece, and we can include Robinson in this as well. And by the way, we'll tie into how does Daniel Jones look, right? And then we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next one. But I guess to your point, what are your expectations from a target share when you look at this? We said, you can throw out the number of like 500 pass attempts is somewhere going to be in the range. Probably going to be more in today's NFL. Could be a little bit less if Daniel Jones misses time. But if you have 500 pass attempts from Daniel Jones, how many of those are going to, let's assume that by this conversation, Daniel Bellinger is going to become then the starter at some point. Let's not sell this down here either. Whatever Seals Jones isn't, what he is a pass catching tight end. So Daniel Bellinger has two things in order to talk about what can he do in his rookie year. First, he has to get over one and two players ahead of him currently on the depth chart. There's no real official depth chart out at this point. And then look at what the production should be. So the first question is he going to be the number one tight end within the first, let's say, 4 weeks of the season?
I think he will. I think he's already proving himself. He continues to push and push. We knew the blocking was going to be there straight away, Adam. Now all of a sudden you're hearing the athleticism and all the catches that he's going to make. He seems like a guy that's going to force himself onto the field, if no other reason than, Ricky Seals Jones and Jordan Akins are kind of veterans that you want to have in the room that make sure that you don't completely bottom out if you don't get someone like Bellinger in the draft.
Mm.
But to me, I think he has all the tools to be able to be a starter week one. And so because of that, I have expectations of, to your point, there's a lot of mouths to feed. But I think what's important to think about is, Mike Kafka is the offensive coordinator. You saw they use Travis Kelce. Clearly, that's not going to be what Daniel Bellinger is going to be, at least anytime soon. But I think what would be interesting is look at Dawson Knox's usage in Buffalo to
Mhm.
understand how Brian Dable has used and utilized the tight end position. And Adam, if I told you that Dawson Knox had about 575 yards last season, is that kind of in the range of where you would expect, you know, Daniel Bellinger to potentially be? 587 yards is what Dawson Knox had total, 39 yards a game. That to
Well,
me,
yeah, but I need how many? What was his targets though? How many targets did he get?
so in terms of targets, Dawson Knox got 71 targets.
Okay, right. So I mean, like right there, you're talking about 71 targets. And even if we went the extra layer here and said, he got 71 targets, and you had Josh Allen. We're gonna do this. We're doing real time action here on the podcast. And Josh Allen is somebody who last season went for actually went for, yeah, I'm saying 500 probably because we haven't seen Daniel Jones throw the ball. He actually threw the ball 646 times. So, but that's the point right there, though. Actually makes my case. Ways 646, so 71 out of 646. I was going to say, if you're talking about 5 or 550, even if it's again 500 to make it the round number, you're talking about 500 passing attempts. You're getting a guy that's getting close to 20%, right? Somewhere in like the 16 to 20% of targets is going to go to Daniel Bellinger. That seems high to me, right? Now, if you talk about getting to 600 and he's closer to 10 than to 20%, okay, fine. But that's really that's what I'm looking at, because if you went by the percentages and said Daniel Jones is going to throw the ball 5 to 550 times, then you're talking about a guy that's getting what, 40 to 50 targets, and what is he turning that into? So that's what that's why it to me comes down to how many reps is he seeing and how many targets is he getting? Because if the share is big enough, then he can be successful, but you're going to be hard pressed, at least initially. Like, I think, I'll put it in these terms, I would be interested to see what his red zone targets look like, right? How he gets utilized maybe in that area of the field, or maybe between the 20, some of those ball moving opportunities. Because if you talk about Kadarius Toney being healthy, if you talk about Wan'Dale Robinson being a contributing rookie, even Kenny Galladay to whatever extent he's at, we already said, like, you need to have half of your pass attempts need to be going to Kadarius Toney, Wan'Dale Robinson, and then probably another 15 to 20% needs to be going to your backfield in Breida and in Saquon Barkley. So, like, just by the numbers, Bellinger is going to have to maximize every opportunity he gets to have success from a stat standpoint.
I agree with that, but also this is becoming more of a passing league. We saw how
Oh, sure, yeah.
conservative
And that's
Jason
why, like,
Garrett.
500 is a low number, by most standards.
Right, because Jason Garrett was an extremely conservative play caller. You had Joe Judge that enabled him to be that type of conservative play caller. That's not the case of what they did in Buffalo. You mentioned over 600 pass attempts. They used short, quick passes to the tight end like Dawson Knox to move the chains because they had little to no run game. When I tell you that Dawson Knox had 71 targets, and that ranks like 18th or 19th in the entire league. So we're saying, even that target share is back half target share in the league. So I don't think it's unreasonable to think that a tight end security blanket for someone like Daniel Jones is going to be able to get that many receptions. So for me, I mean, look at Evan Ingram had 73 targets last year with Daniel Jones. So in fact, Dawson Knox had less targets than Evan
But
Ingram did.
73, yeah, but 73 targets on a team that was bereft of talent, right? Like, the injury, you didn't have Kadarius Toney for so long. You didn't have Sterling Shepard. Kenny Galladay was up and down. You had Saquon Barkley coming back for the first time. You had an inconsistent Darius Slayton. Like, 73 targets for Evan Ingram, who by all accounts was the, using for listeners, air quotes, the best, the best weapon on offense and in a multitude of games. Now, how coverage gets played, etc. But he got to 73. So again, let's just have that conversation then, though. He gets 75 targets. What does he convert that into? Do you think that it's reasonable? We want to set that bar at saying, because I'd be happy with, by the way, as a rookie, tell me he clears 500 yards receiving, right? And tell me he gets used in some of those key spots, a little bit of a chain mover potentially in some of those looks. I'm also completely happy if he shows up on the field for key blocking situations and helps the offensive line have some success in the run game and help protect Daniel Jones. But anything over 500 yards for me and a few touchdowns in his rookie year, I think is going to be success, especially again, because that means that he's probably maximizing the opportunities. It's not about, well, he got 140, targets and only picked up 35 receptions. I think if he can be a high volume percentage from receiving, as Evan Ingram was not, right? If he can do that, then I think you start to move the needle a little bit on where those numbers can go just from a pure stat standpoint.
So you were talking about yards. I'm going to go in the touchdown direction because it's all about points, baby. Think about this. Mark Andrews, league leader, 9 receptions for touchdown, tied with Travis Kelce with 9 receptions for touchdown. I'd say those two are pretty good. Guess what? Dawson Knox was tied with both of them for the league lead in touchdowns by a tight end. So while I'm not heaping expectations onto Daniel Bellinger, what I'm saying is look at the system that Brian Daboll has created and understand the importance of the tight end in the red zone. I don't know if 500 yards is good or great, but I think Evan Ingram having 3 touchdowns on a terrible team. I could see Bellinger. I'm expecting Bellinger to have 5 touchdowns. Like I could see him being utilized as a red zone threat because that's what Brian Daboll did just with Dawson Knox up in Buffalo.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's fair. So, I mean, we talk about catch percentages, those types of things. We can iron it out. But all right, so we're going to be doing this all off season, as we've talked about before, just kind of setting the standards for it. So we can go ahead and check Daniel Bellinger off that board. Expectations are 500 yards, 5 touchdowns, right?
Yep.
Let's leave the receptions off the board. We'll worry about all those other details a little bit later on. But that's the goal here: is 505 for Daniel Bellinger in his rookie season. That's interesting, man. And by the way, the Knox comparison from production in the red zone standpoint is definitely worth noting, especially when we think about as good as we think some of these receivers can be. Just a big body who can occupy space, right, and fend off defenders, and wondering what Kenny Golladay is going to be coming back this season. Certainly Bellinger has a role to carve out for himself. So we end up at the end of the day turning our attention in a big way, to the tight end position and to one Daniel Bellinger. We'll talk about Wando Robinson over the course of this offseason too. We're going to do probably full episodes where we, project what we think some of these guys can be and how productive they can be from a stat standpoint. But it's not bad to drop one in here knowing that they're still going to be now this week and then also next week when it comes to OTAs before we get into the mandatory mini camps and later in the summer and everything else. Like, this is the time to move the needle as much as you can if you're Daniel Bellinger. So that may be by the time we get to preseason games, you just have it. First team reps, right? Like, he is going to be out there for you. First thing he has to do, obviously, is learn the system, something that, by the way, every tight end is doing right now themselves. So you don't have anybody coming in with familiarity. It's a new system for everybody, and that probably gives him an even footing as much as anything.
Well, and as you said, at the end of the day, Daniel Bellinger having 500 yards would put him 19th or 20th in terms of total yards. So if he could be a top 20 tight end in the league in year 1, that's
That's
successful
reasonable.
for him.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
you know what? That would make me excited because while Evan Ingram had all, dripping with talent and oozing with athleticism and ability, he never gave Giant fans the same feeling that guys like Kevin Boss, Jeremy Shockey, or Jake Ballard or any of those guys ended up doing. And if we can have a top 20 type tight end that can block and play hard, I think Giant fans will sign up for that immediately.
You better believe it. We will come back in. We're going to talk about the Chris Sims rankings of the NFL quarterbacks, what we should or should not take away from it, some of the names that are in and around Daniel Jones and where he ranks. Could he rise or fall this season? It's obviously entirely possible. But what's the competition level look like? And I mean, listen, we all know we just want to see him play well. So that really is the most important piece here. But where is his starting off point as he looks ahead to a critical season for his NFL career? We'll break that down. We'll talk about OTA takeaways here, see what other information we get from a health standpoint. And until then, though, friends, check us out on YouTube, subscribe, like, rate, and review. The podcast is out there for you as well. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.